Hello and welcome to another episode of CollectaThoughts, the show where I collect my thoughts on video games, and today we're gonna be talking about a very special game, Wheelman, or also known as Vin Diesel's Wheelman. Yes, this is a Vin Diesel video game. There is a surprising amount of Vin Diesel's video games between Fast and the Furious and also the Chronicles of Riddick franchise, but both of those are based on movies. This one, Wheelman, is wholly original and was actually meant to kind of work the other way around, where they made the video game first and then they were going to make a movie about it, which never ended up happening. So, as it stands, it is purely a video game with Vin Diesel. And what is this game really about? Well, let me tell you, this is an insanely convoluted story, and there's no real point in actually going too deep into it. The most interesting asset about it is that it takes place in Barcelona, which does make it stand out since there isn't a whole lot of games that just take place in Spain in general, especially not open world games, which is what this is, very much inspired by GTA, but we'll get into that later. First, while we're still here in the story, let me tell you something. While this game takes place in Spain, no one in this game sounds Spanish. Everyone just sounds insanely American. And the reason for this does make some sense. They probably got American actors because the actors in this game needed to talk both languages. Very often they change between speaking Spanish and English. And I'll say this as someone who knows a little bit about Spain from being their neighbor, that they don't know a whole lot of English. It is very surprising to find a native Spanish person who can speak fluent English, which from what I understand has to do with how they develop their language. You know, we all have our accents and their accent just happens to not play well with English. At least that's how it's been explained to me. I'm not quite sure if that's the real reason. Regardless, it does make me more forgiving of this game's cast choices, even though I'm also quite sure that they just went, let's get people who can speak Spanish, let's get some Mexican people, who cares? And clearly, you know, not the same Spanish, and the accent is extremely noticeable, which is distracting, but because I already thought that the story was so dumb and convoluted, I honestly didn't care. I just thought it made it funnier, especially since a lot of the times the Spanish in this game really just seems to be an excuse to say swear words. So, you know, characters will be discussing something and they'll get pissed and change to Spanish to say a couple swear words. It's quite funny, honestly. Adding also to the comedy of it all, which is not intentional I don't think, is Vin Diesel's voice acting. He's very stoic, like he is in every movie, and when you translate to this very stiff late 2000s graphics PS3 Xbox era type of game, I think it really does play out funny, especially since he doesn't really have all that many lines to begin with. They're really trying to sell him as this ultimate badass that just can do anything, and it's just impossible to take serious. And yeah, that's the overall story. It's Vin Diesel tries to be cool in Spain and he messes around with gang wars. That's really all you need to know. Where the whole badass Vin Diesel thing does come into work a lot better, in my opinion, is in the gameplay. Like I said, it is very inspired by GTA and even the mission structures are very similar. This of course just has a much bigger focus on cars. I guess because people just expect Vin Diesel to be related to cars, especially in that era where the Fast and Furious movies were so big. So, to try and understand this, let's first start with the good, which I think is the more crazy aspects of this game. Some of its more creative ideas, I would say. Like, for example, there's this ability that while driving you can press a button to completely 180 your car and shoot behind you for a limited amount of time. Also in this mode you can see like the weak point of the car, so to say. It's really just a place to aim at that will make the car explode faster. And this looks so ridiculous. You can also do it for the front of course, but pointing towards the front it really just seems like the game is going slow motion and letting you aim. This backwards mode is just insane. It's really kind of completely unrealistic, but in a really fun way. It does really sell you on this action hero badass in the way that you're going, 100 miles an hour and you just completely turn around, shoot a bunch of guys, and then turn back and continue going 100 miles an hour. The problem is, this mechanic clearly wasn't very polished. Sometimes doing this can be very buggy, and by that I mean you'll do it, and then when you go back to going back to going 100 miles an hour, well, the physics of the game just don't do well with that, and sometimes the car, or especially motorcycles, have a tendency of just kind of wrecking themselves, and that might be realistic. That might be what actually should happen in that situation, but as a gameplay feature, it doesn't really work. And it's clearly that it's a bug. Clearly that's not what it's supposed to happen. When you do with a motorcycle, you're not supposed to, turn around, shoot, and turn back and fly 100 meters in the air, because the game didn't know what to do with the physics. The other problem that leads me to talk about other features of this game is that the game in general, the way it works, it really disincentivizes you from using any of these powers by the way it's balanced. For example, you have Nitro, which of course makes you go faster. The problem is this game has a tendency of working in a very on-rails kind of feeling to it. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of rubber banding, and when you're supposed to catch someone, a lot of the times you're not actually meant to catch them at that moment, so the car in front of you, or the one you're trying to catch in this case, will just accelerate insanely, very unrealistically, to not be caught by you using the Nitro. Which makes it so, was there even a reason to use the Nitro at all in that moment, since regardless of whatever speed you go at, the car in front of you just is gonna be set to kind of wait for you. This also happens when, for example, you have a really bad crash and the car will just slow down to wait for you to get back up and catch up to him. Within a certain limit, of course, the cars will not just stop for you and wait. You will fail the mission if they get too far away, which did happen a few times in some annoying situations, because the checkpoint system is also quite bad. There's not much to say about it, and I want to talk more about the mechanics of the game being kind of counterintuitive, but the checkpoint system can be often pretty bad, making you either restart a mission from the start, which is the least of its problems, even though some of these missions go on for way too long for that kind of restart. But sometimes the checkpoints are way worse because they put you in situations where it's very hard to recover and you'll probably have to restart the mission anyways, which is very annoying. Regardless, getting back to the whole mechanics not working well with the other mechanics, the Nitro once again doesn't work well because there's a lot of rubber banding, and it's not really a racing game either. You're not taking laps around anything. It's usually more like chases and action sequences, which I get. They want you to reach a certain spot before the big action sequence can happen, but it also makes for a very linear and on rails feeling game. The other thing adding to this as well, now connecting to the first mechanic I talked about with the whole twisting around and shooting at cars, is that enemy cars, when you're on one of these missions where you're just going to be following a car for a while, they just keep spawning no matter how many you destroy. So it doesn't really matter if you destroy them. You're really just trying to destroy them so you can get a moment of peace, or so they don't destroy your car. But it isn't like it's balanced well. It's not like you destroy the cars and then you have a bit of peace so you don't get your car completely wrecked. It's more like you destroy a car and then a completely new one immediately shows up. So realistically, as a player, you're more incentivized to just kind of handicap those cars rather than taking them out completely. The problem is, it really feels like you can't handicap these cars. It's so easy to blow up their tires and yet they still go at full speed. The same thing happens to you. I swear it's almost impossible to finish any race or any mission with a full tire. I wish I was joking, but it really seems the moment you enter a car, someone will start shooting at the tires and it will blow up, which doesn't really impede the gameplay like I said. But it is stupid, and it also makes it so, you can't really handicap other cars either. The car is pretty much burning. It really just drives like it's new, which is a bit weird. It's kind of weird that they make these mechanics in such contradictory ways that make them, less enjoyable. And for me, kind of the last straw on this was this other mechanic that also was really cool on paper. It reminded me of Sleeping Dogs, so if you've played that game, you're gonna recognize this, and it's the ability to jump from cars to cars and steal them. It's a really cool idea. I think it's really fun, especially since this game loves wrecking your car. But once again, the mechanic itself is very janky. Locking up to cars can feel weird. But the real problem here is there just isn't enough cars to jump into while you're in a mission. When you're just driving around the open world, there's plenty of cars all around and you can very easily do this jumping around, fun gameplay mechanic. But when you're in a mission, it really seems like they severely decreased the spawn rate of regular vehicles. And this wouldn't be a problem if you could just jump into the enemy vehicles, but a lot of missions lock you out of doing this for some reason, and it makes it very annoying. Also, some missions just are designed to not let you do this, which I also think is fairly annoying. They'll be like, hey, you have someone else in your car, so you won't be able to jump cars in this mission, which I get. They're trying to make a slightly harder mission, but honestly, if you're gonna have this cool mechanic in your game, use it more. It feels weird. Obviously, the game is insanely unpolished. It probably did not have a big development cycle. It probably was rushed out, and that's probably why it's so buggy and unpolished in general, like I said. And the mission structures are also very repetitive because of what I just said, probably. Mostly just revolving around driving a car and following another car really fast, and other cars come and try to take you down. That's really every mission in this game. Only occasionally third-person shooting sections, which is the reason why I say this is kinda like GTA. Maybe it could be compared to the Driver series as well, but again GTA because there is a lot more shooting. And these third-person sections are fine, they're very mediocre even for the time. It is a game of shoot them in the head and everything else really doesn't count. And while the game gives you options of weapons for long and close range, it really feels like the game was designed for the long range, since whenever you're in these shooting sections there's always a considerable gap between you and the enemies that would make trying to use something like a shotgun just very unusable or simply not worth it. That being said, I'm still glad that these scenes are here because I think I would have gotten insanely bored of the driving, which I did by the end of the game. I was very much just please be over. And this is not a long game, it's about 4 to 5 hours. Like a lot of games at the time were. There are a few side missions you can do, but I'll be honest, I really didn't have an interest in interacting with them much. It's mostly, the things you expect from this type of game: races, taxi missions, the sort. But one interesting thing about the side missions is it kind of shows how unfinished the game is, because they're all located on one side of the map and then the other side of the map is pretty much completely barren. It makes me think once again that the game was rushed. It's a similar story when we talk about the more technical side of this game. The graphics. The game looks okay for the time, but there's also just way too much repetition in the open world. If I was left in this open world, I would really never know where I actually was. It's very hard to recognize an area, even though the game itself uses very popular landmarks from Barcelona, like Casa Maila or the Arc of Triumph, or even La Sagrada Familia, which gets used in the story. And I still couldn't tell you what it is on the game, because the streets themselves all just look like the same buildings set up in rows very repeatedly, like, someone just kind of popped them in there without any context. Like, they did it in a rush, like the thing was closing and they said, we're gonna release this game whether or not you want it, and then they were like, wait, I haven't finished the city yet, and then they just copy pasted every building. That's just a theory though, a game theory. Now the soundtrack, well, I could say it was done in a rush, but I have no idea. But legitimately it's awful. There's just so many just really bad tracks in my opinion. They sound awful. I think they were trying to go for that kind of Hollywood action movie vibe, but infuse it with a Spanish sound, and it just doesn't work in my opinion. When it's just a Spanish sound or when it's just an action movie sound, then it's fine. When they try to mix both, it really does not come off right. If you don't believe me, just listen to the Wheelman's original soundtrack, Escape the Police track. Overall though, it's just not a great game. There's a couple things you can point out, like the turning behind and shooting. That's really cool, even though it doesn't make any sense. It's pretty fun to do. That's what matters, I think. If it was polished, it would be, I think, the saving grace of this game. There's also the jumping between cars mechanic, which this game didn't invent. At least personally, I had played Pursuit Force on the PSP way before this game even came out, and I'm not sure if that game invented that mechanic either, so who knows. Regardless, once again, even in that PSP game, that mechanic worked a lot better, so here again, it could have been really fun if it worked. And that's really my whole opinion on the game. It could have been just dumb fun, even with really repetitive missions and not so great design and a horribly funny, convoluted story. I think if those mechanics worked, they would have just made the game fun. But as it stands, the game is really just kind of annoying. It's not enough of a so bad it's good kind of deal, and it's just not enough of a good in general kind of deal. So it just kind of sits in that in-between where I'm not having fun and I'm honestly just kind of getting bored of it. And I really shouldn't for a game that's 4 hours long and is full of action. And so for those reasons, I am giving Wheelman a 4 out of 10. Honestly, I wish Vin Diesel would make a Wheelman 2. I think there's potential here. If Vin Diesel, if you're watching this, do it. I dare you. You're full of money. You could do it. It doesn't have to be a AAA game. It can be like an indie game. You wouldn't believe the things they can do with indie games now. So just do it, okay, Vin? We're on first name basis. Regardless, recommendations wise, it's very hard to recommend. Not because of the quality of the game, but because the game has delisted from any online store. So the only way to play it is to buy a used copy for the Xbox, which to be honest would be the platform I recommend, since it probably also has a lot less bugs. This is not particularly a good PC port and it runs weird on modern machines. You could probably tell from the gameplay footage that the shadows were all kind of messed up. Also, I don't even know if you can buy a used version on PC, because I don't know if this game ever had a physical release, and even if it did, it might have been tied to Steam, so there's that. Of course, there are other ways to play on PC still, if you're willing to go down that route, and even on Xbox as well. Even though I would never recommend that path for the Xbox, since you can pretty much buy the game for less than $10 on eBay, which I guess for that price, if you just want to laugh at Vin Diesel doing really monotone work for a video game, I think you can squeeze out $10. That's fine. Regardless of what your decision is though, I hope that you enjoyed watching. And if so, please consider subscribing, liking, commenting, or disliking now. All the things you can do for free here on YouTube. And regardless of that, I was gonna try and do a Vin Diesel impression as an outro, but I cannot. He sounds like a subwoofer drowning. It's just way too out of my voice acting abilities, which are none. Anyways, goodbye.